Hello.
Well, welcome on Sunday evening. Been a week and maybe more than a week heavy with death announcements. And
It's a cheery start, Charles.
yeah, well, sometimes, you look for new beginnings in a new year and all that, but I'm afraid endings still happen. That's the reality of life. And so tonight we're going to reflect on that. And we're also going to look at someone who's still provoking discussion and still very much doing his never-ending world tour, Bob Dylan. And of course, we're going to look at A Complete Unknown, the new biopic starring Timothy Chalamet. But I feel we ought to start with a retrospective on David Lynch and a filmmaker. Do you know, Gren, this is a surprise. When do you think he last made a film? Not the Twin Peaks comeback, but a film.
I would say about 2004, maybe 2006.
So 2006 is the answer. And
Okay.
that's when you think he was what, 78 that he's died
Mm,
at.
mm.
So his last film, which is described wonderfully by Peter Bradshaw as an evil twin of Mulholland Drive, in
Mm.
Inland Empire was the last film.
Yeah, but I think we saw it at the Edinburgh National Film Festival together.
That would ring a bell.
And it went on forever. It was
Yeah.
filmed in the then currently fashionable style of video
Yes.
rather than like looking cinematic.
Yeah.
And we both thought it went on too long
Yeah.
and wasn't as good as some of his previous films, or in fact, most of his previous films.
I mean, I don't know the explanation behind the why there were no further films. I
I think
guess,
Inland Empire is the explanation.
well, I mean, should that really kill a career off? I mean, Woody Allen's
Well,
not wasn't killed off by bad films.
you got to remember that Lynch's films, by contemporary standards, because he was a
Yeah.
mainstream filmmaker, it wasn't art house,
No.
and there
Yeah.
wasn't
Absolutely.
streaming
Yeah.
when he was making most of his films.
Yeah.
He was in the mainstream cinemas. He was in the multiplexes,
Mm.
and and if you look at the films now, I watched The Lost Highway on Saturday night, which I've watched
Ah.
for 1996 with a
Yeah.
fairly boring Bill Pullman, but it's still a brilliant film.
Yeah.
These films look weird as hell now. You can't believe they were so mainstream. And I think the world moved on and cinema moved on. And by the late noughties, when he should have still been making films, that sort of film just wasn't mainstream anymore.
No. Well,
And
it
it's even
wasn't.
less mainstream now.
I mean, so there are two last things that he did. One of which a little quiz question for you, which is the last time that he appeared on screen, but we'll come to that. So the
I know the
last,
answer.
you know the answer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Pretty
Go on,
sure.
go on.
The Fableman Spielberg's film.
And who did he play?
Oh, I don't know. He played some like Orson Welles or somebody famous, John
So,
Ford,
so he
probably John
played the
Ford,
the Western
director.
movie man John Ford.
John Ford,
So
yeah, of the
that is who.
Searchers fame.
So to actually play someone of significant stature in filmmaking
Mm,
himself
mm.
was so that's the last time on screen, and that was not that long ago. He gave up cigarettes in 2022 and then became a passionate campaigner for trying to encourage people not to smoke. But emphysema eventually did for him, and all the smoking that he'd done over the years. He considered smoking to be a form of heaven, but then I think it became, as smoking often does, a form of hell as well, of course. But so yeah, so 2017 was the last concentrated work, which of course was the return of Twin Peaks. And do you know the most unlikely moment in that, Graham?
No, because it was shown on a channel that I didn't subscribe to, so
So
I've never seen
that
Twin
is
Peaks:
now
The Return.
absolutely now. So that was 2017. Shown. I don't know which channel it was shown on, but like you, I never saw it. So I never saw David Bowie being turned into a giant kettle. I'd love to have seen that.
Well, yeah, but Bowie turned up in Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me film.
He did. He did.
So yeah, Lynch and Bowie had a thing going for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And in fact,
So
the Lost Highway film begins with a David Bowie song.
it does. And actually, I mean, many of the things that we could look at, I think Can you think of another filmmaker who has used music so effectively, so consistently, so powerfully, so
Oh yeah,
erotically
I can
as
think
David
I think
Lynch at his
of
best?
one. Yeah, I can think of one because he
Go on.
influenced him. Tarantino. If you
Yes.
look at Blue Velvet now, and
Yeah.
especially Wild at Heart
Yeah.
with the young Nicolas Cage, it,
And
it
songs by Chris Isaac.
there's so
Mm,
much Tarantino in it.
mm,
Tarantino's David Lynch with all the surrealism taken out.
yeah. Yeah. Julie Cruz, of course. That's a
Mm.
very suitably mysterious figure. Uh, doing Where is she? Where did she go? One great album, but what happened? Very much a
Well, there's an
Lynchian
air
type
of
story.
mystery over Lynch the whole time. Lynch was
Mm,
he looked like a completely normal person, and if you think about Cal MacLachlan in Twin Peaks
yeah. Yeah.
and in Blue Velvet, the classic movie,
Mm,
he looks like a
mm,
normal person, but he does
mm.
strange things. He's in a strange world, and David Lynch himself was a bit like that. He looked like a regular guy, but he clearly was very far from an average normal person.
If I mean, people use the term Hitchcockian. They use the term Lynchian. What would that term mean to you if something is described as Lynchian?
Well, I think Lynch was America's Buñuel or Fellini. There's something surreal about everything he does, and
Yes.
something poetic. And the difference between Lynch and, say, a European director like Buñuel or Fellini
Mm.
is his subject material was very American, just like Tarantino's is very American. And by that, what I mean is it usually involves violence. It usually involves crime. Some of the stories that Lynch made and Tarantino still makes involve crime and violence and a bit of glamour. And Lynch had glamour as well. Lynch understood showbiz. What he did, he did his own twisted, uh, undermining version of glamour
Mm.
in showbiz. So Lynchian basically means being very American, but undermining the stereotypes and cliches of mainstream America in a glamorous, stylish, but disturbing way.
Experimentalism meeting the everyday Americana.
Yeah, but he's a bit like Prince, the musician. Like Prince is totally mainstream, but he's also a bit weird the whole time as well. He's not predictable or middle of the road. There's something slightly odd about Prince a lot of the time, but he's so good at it. It's so appealing that everybody loves it. And in Lynch films, even Lost Highway is a very strange film, but it looks $1 million and it's full of moments that any average person in the street would think were great.
Was he a director of moments? I mean, if one looks at the way that meaning could be elusive in his films, they could be elliptical in structure, but they could be elusive. That he would throw in red herrings, but then you'd have a great Julie Cruz song. You'd have a great Chris Isaac song. You'd have he used women interestingly in the way maybe Hitchcock used women as well. How he played them in his films. But they're often a damn fine cup of coffee. They're a Dennis Hopper moment. So memorable moments are really strong in his filmmaking. But was there at the same time coherence to his filmmaking, or actually did he delight in the fact that they were somewhat elusive and that meaning wasn't obvious in his films?
He did two types of films. He could do a straight narrative, and he did do so. So, for
Mm.
example, Elephant Man, completely straight
Yeah,
narrative.
yeah.
Dune, an adaptation of Frank Herbert's novel,
Starring
completely
Sting.
straight
Mm.
narrative reconstruction of that book. Also,
Mm.
the straight story doesn't get any straighter than the straight story.
the
And
straightest film, the
story,
straightest film he ever made.
yeah, and it's a great film. It's still a great film. So he could
Right,
do
absolutely.
your,
Mm.
your old-fashioned standard stories, but all these
Mm.
greatest films, Blue Velvet, Mulholland Drive, Lost Highway, Twin Peaks, Fire Walk for Me, he, they're all poetic and all
Mm.
surreal. And Blue Velvet's probably got the straightest narrative of those films.
Yeah.
You can watch that and think it is just a straight story, even
Mm.
though it isn't really. But Mulholland Drive, for example, which started off as being a TV project, but
Yeah. Yeah.
that floundered financially, so he turned it into a film.
To
And
film.
it's
Yeah.
it's quite a long film. I think it's 2.5 hours
Yeah.
long,
Yeah. Yeah.
Mulholland Drive.
Mm.
And I've watched it many times, and it's a great film. But do I understand what's going on a lot of the time? No, I don't literally understand it.
Two women
But it,
merging into
but
one story. Two women
you get a
merging into one
feeling.
story. Mm.
The great thing about Lynch's surrealism and Lynch's poetry is it gives you a feeling which feels real. You feel that there's something going on that you can't literally understand, but it's making a point. And it isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's not just showing off to art house friends. It means something emotionally. There's emotions in Lynch films.
I think
And whether
that's
you
the key,
understand
Graham.
the point he's
I
making or
think
not, you
that's the
feel the
key.
point.
That
You feel the
emotion
point.
plays out really strongly in his films. So that
Mm,
even if meaning is not obvious, I mean, but then life's full of that. We don't, well, we're both in our 60s. I don't claim to understand things particularly any more than I ever did. I still struggle to, and I want to explain things and understand things. But I like the fact that meaning sometimes is just, it is beyond. But emotion is playing out in the meantime, and his films are full of emotions which give us emotional reactions. We do not disconnect from them because of that reason, because emotion constantly plays its role. Then it's not that, even if they're elusive in their meaning, we're on an emotional journey, and I think that's one of his great skills in his filmmaking.
well, he's American. I mean, he isn't European. And like Tarantino, he brings certain elements of European cinema to American subject matter, but remains entirely American.
Mm,
Tarantino loves Jean-Luc Godard films, especially the 1960s ones before he got really weird.
mm,
But they're not like Godard films.
no,
They're not as intellectual as Godard films, and they're
no.
not as arty or art house as Godard films. And Lynch is the same thing. Lynch is a very American European, just as Tarantino is a very American European. But that's why they're great. If they were just trying to copy European art house films, they wouldn't be so special. What makes them special is the fact they are authentically American, but there's more to them than most authentically American art forms.
He was also a painter and a photographer, and I think that one of the great things about his filmmaking, it's a visual medium for all the fact that languages, and it's interesting how he uses language, and it's probably the language in his films that's elusive.
And sound. He took sound really seriously. Sound
Yeah.
was very important to Lynch,
Yes.
as much as visuals, as
So
much as
that
music.
the use of sound for atmosphere, but then Hitchcock would have done that as well. But I think it's the visual flair that's there that you want in great filmmaking. And if one looks at he being an influence, I mean, Tarantino's obviously been an influence on. I mean, you can argue who's the greater influence on The Sopranos, but surely both of them have played their part in The Sopranos being made in the way that series was. Or maybe Scorsese has an impact on that as well. Um, but it is, I think, the visual flair that he has that I think distinguishes himself. That, as I say, the memorable images that he comes up with and that go beyond that go beyond the
Mm.
individual film. That just I can visualize constantly in my head, having heard about him dying this week. Images keep coming back to me from his films.
You're right, Charles, but there are some filmmakers who are much younger and more recent than Lynch
Mm,
who've also got great visuals. I've forgotten the director's name who directed the Blade Runner sequel. Was it Blade Runner
yeah,
2045 or something? Well,
yeah.
if you turn the sound down in that film, it looks fantastic. His visual flair is immense.
You
Turn the
could
sound
probably
up, and
you
the
can
lack of emotion, the
yeah.
lack of characterization, the lack of dialogue
Mm,
is equally striking. And Lynch had character, he had the ideas, he had the emotion, he had the
yeah.
dialogue. He did the whole thing. But I think you should also remember that Lynch's films had meanings. And when he first became famous, mainly through Blue Velvet, that was his first big hit, even though Elephant Man had been a hit.
Yeah.
It was a huge hit, was Blue Velvet. People at the time thought that he was taking America back to the 1950s, the sort of like Eisenhower era, sort of
Yeah.
influenced by the Reagan era. And
Yeah.
he did bring back some traditionalism because, for example, in Blue Velvet, one of the key scenes has Roy Orbison's In Dreams song,
Yeah.
almost the whole song.
Yeah.
Well, Roy Orbison at that point hadn't had a hit for about 20
No.
years.
No.
And in Wild at Heart, before Elvis became hip and cool again, you got Nicolas Cage doing his Elvis Presley impersonation, Wild at
Mm.
Heart.
Yes.
So there was an element of and the white picket fence that's in Blue Velvet a lot. There was an element of Lynch going back to the 1950s to his own childhood. But what makes it different, and a bit like Tarantino also is into that 50s, early 60s
Mm.
rock and roll aesthetic as well. There's a traditionalist inside Tarantino, there's a traditionalist inside Lynch. But on top of that, Lynch films are, in terms of gender, sex in general,
Mm.
morality, they're all very loose and liberal, and there's drugs and there's bad behavior, just like in
Yeah.
Tarantino films. So I don't think that Lynch's films from the 1980s onwards were a return to the 1950s. I think they were a vision of the future because what we've got now in the Western world is right-wing politics with liberal morality, liberal gender, liberal sex. So Lynch was actually a snapshot of the future,
Mm.
a snapshot of our current day.
I mean, if you look at the cornerstones of the films, you'd probably say sensuality, eroticism, strangeness, dark wit.
Also, yeah, but also showing how, especially people in power Lynch films can quite often be hypocrites.
Yeah,
People who look to be respectable on the surface quite often have
yeah.
a dark side to them, or
Mm.
if not a criminal side to them. A Lynch world is a world where the surface isn't what's really happening. What's really happening is below the surface, and it's usually compromised, and it's
Yeah.
usually corrupt, and it's
That
usually very physical.
Yeah, that echoes one of the tribute pieces that I read, which quoted the Laura Dern line, "Everything being so wild at heart but weird on top." And then actually, the writer made the point that in fact, Lynch's films actually would showing that what was normal on top, and then he would show what was weird underneath the surface. So, despite the famous Laura Dern quote, actually, it's the
Yeah,
weird underneath that keeps bursting through and shattering the normality of what you referred to as the white picket fence America.
yeah, but in Lynch films, you're right. In Lynch films, the normal is actually abnormal.
Mm.
And in Lynch films, what people in general and the establishment think is abnormal is actually is actually normal. So he's got an upside down view of society and public, which is probably more realistic than Hollywood's usual version of reality.
So, I mean, he would present the American dream, but he'd do it what as the American extreme, as the American scream.
Yeah, I don't think he was someone who was trying to puncture the American dream. He wasn't making films to make a gigantic point. He was more poetic
Right.
than that. And I think he thought life was a lot more complex than just making a political point. But he's basically saying that he basically wasn't interested in the American dream except to say that that isn't how the world actually operates.
Mm.
But he didn't do it so he could undermine the American dream. I mean, he obviously was in his own politics a little bit by American standards left of center.
Yes.
But
Yes.
his films aren't, there's nothing, there's no film director less of a sloganizer or a sloganeer than
Mm.
David Lynch.
Mm.
The man's like a genius, or at least he was a genius.
I mean, Twin Peaks would be, you could call it a soap opera, couldn't you?
Yeah, well, yeah, but what he's saying there is that life is a soap opera, but it's
Yeah.
not the soap opera that the mainstream shows you. It's a
No.
different type of soap opera that's
Yeah.
actually happening.
Yeah.
That's what his film's really about.
Mm.
Life is a soap opera. It just isn't the soap opera you thought it was, or at least it wasn't. It isn't the soap opera that the public realm is dominated by for the sake of keeping the show on the road.
And I would say as well, the films were made with that dark wit, the humor that's there, um, constantly pulling the rug from the expected and the obvious, while actually sort of dealing with those
Mm,
everyday things in life. So, and there was a playfulness there as well for all the darkness that's there and the supernatural horror
mm.
that's in some of it and the thriller elements that's there. I do think that there was a humor where he was playing with his audience and challenging them, which I think good filmmaking should do. I mean, it was the most powerful art form of the 20th century, and he was very much part of why it was.
Well, true artists tend to be people who are in the round. They're
Yes.
not just interested in one thing. They're not just good at one thing. They
No.
don't just have one tone, one idea, one emotion. They have the whole cornucopia
Yeah.
of life's different aspects. And Lynch was a truly great artist, and that's why his films also have a great sense of humor, if occasionally warped and slightly weird.
So maybe it's unfair to spring this on you to choose a favorite film, and that's rather like a smash hits. What's your favorite color sock type question? But do you want to pick a favorite?
Impossible. He's the first major film director I loved, whose career spans my whole life. So
Mm.
I first saw Razorhead, his first
1977.
terribly weird
Mm.
black and
Mm.
white, short black and white film. I saw
Yeah,
that at Edinburgh when I was at university,
yeah.
and then I saw Blue Velvet when I was working at the Guild Times. And then I saw the rest of his films, and we saw
Mm.
Inland Empire together at Edinburgh National Film Festival. And I also have a 2 degrees of separation connection to David Lynch, which I can't often say about
No.
filmmakers as famous as him. So basically, he bankrolled his own band in the tens, and he had a singer called Christabel, a very striking looking woman and great
Oh
singer.
yes, yes,
And my great American friend Rod, who lived in Harrogate for a while with his family, was the
yes.
keyboard synth player in the band.
Oh
And
yeah.
so they didn't play many gigs in Britain because they
No.
only played posh gigs
Yeah.
in Western Europe where they were on the front cover of like European Vogue and things like that because of
Yeah.
David Lynch
Yeah.
connection. And they would come on stage with a film edited by David Lynch introducing the band. So it was David Lynch's band.
Mm.
And at the time, they were a great band, but they weren't obviously successful by any normal
No.
standards. The David
No.
Lynch name made them vaguely well known. But at one point, Rod brought Christabel on one of their few British tours to Harrogate. So
Oh
I had a
yeah.
night out in Major Tom's Bar in Harrogate about 10 years ago, just
Yes.
me, Rod, and Christabel for the
Yeah.
whole evening. And how weird is that? That's like a scene from a David Lynch
Yeah.
film.
Yeah.
And at the time, I thought, well, Christabel's clearly, a talented, interesting person.
Mm.
But, she's not a household name.
No.
And then what happened after that? I'll tell you after that.
Mm.
When Lynch's autobiography came out
Yeah.
about 5 years later, she's
Mm.
in about 15 pages of the book.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then when he made Twin Peaks: The Return on TV,
Mm.
she got although it was a minor role, it was a regular, important minor role.
Yeah.
And then what did he do last year? One of his final creative acts, the
Hmm.
Cellophane Memories album, was him and Christabel completely doing an album together. So
Oh.
10 years ago, I was as close to David Lynch as I was ever going to get.
A very Lynchian moment, Graham. So that's a good long tribute to one of the great filmmakers, and I like that point actually that he's been there throughout throughout your life of going to see films. Um, Another regular presence through life, anyone who's interested in the arts would be Bob Dylan, of course from the '60s onwards in his case, and just newly into the cinemas as of Friday is the film A Complete Unknown. And Graham, you ask, this is it's a biopic opening the same week, of course, as Maria, starring Angelina Jolie, which we may get the chance to look at
It's
next
Maria
week.
Callas, the opera singer.
Yeah, absolutely. So you wonder whether it's a complete success. Now, to me, it's a complete blank at the moment because I haven't yet been to see a complete unknown. Um, so the context of this film, Mark Kermode gave it a 13-minute review, and I can't remember the last time he talked 13 minutes about any film.
Mm.
That's how in depth his review was with Simon Mayo. We don't have 13 minutes to give to it on this, but Graham, inevitably, I guess the choice here is how accurate does it need to be, and does that matter? Which it did to Mark Kermode, who found a couple of artistic compromises that he just couldn't handle, which was the use Pete Seeger using an axe, which actually was only a metaphorical image that Pete Seeger said he wanted to use an axe, and of course the Judas comment was said at the Free Trade Hall in Manchester, and not actually as you can describe where it's
Yeah,
shown as being at.
I don't really care about that sort of thing.
Okay, that's
It's a
fine.
bit
So
like
that's interesting. That's
yeah,
straight away a contrast with Kermode. Okay.
yeah. The Blade Runner film, for example, is nothing like the Philip K. Dick book, which I read years before,
Yeah.
not years, about 5 years before Ridley Scott made the film. But it's a
Mm,
brilliant film, and
mm,
it captures the spirit of the book. It doesn't
mm.
capture it literally whatsoever,
No.
but it captures the spirit and the ideas and the essence of Philip K. Dick. So
Sure.
it's a brilliant film.
Yeah.
And The Complete Unknown does quite the same because I hate biopics of musicians. They
Mm,
always turn them into cartoon figures. They not only
yeah.
change the facts, they also usually have people playing the main character who do not have the charisma of the
Yeah.
star the film is
Mm.
about, and it doesn't capture the meaning of the star or the meaning of their music or their life in any way except a sort of ladybird, very
Mm.
one-dimensional version of it. So I
Yeah.
hate most biopics.
You do.
So I
I
wasn't
know.
looking forward to Complete Unknown, but
Mm.
oh my good grief. I was nearly I nearly said something else. A Complete Unknown for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, oh, this is the best biopic ever made. The first 45 minutes is sensationally good,
Mm.
partly because Timothée Chalamet
Mm.
is fantastic as Bob Dylan. It's
Yeah.
not that he's exactly the same as Bob Dylan, but he inhabits Bob Dylan. He's like a totally believable version of Bob Dylan, a
Mm.
bit like who played Jim Morrison in Oliver Stone's The Doors movie?
Val Kilmer.
Yeah, he wasn't exactly the same as Jim Morrison, but he
No.
was believable as Jim Morrison because he
Mm.
was as charismatic as Jim Morrison. Well,
Mm.
Timothy Chalamet is as cool as Bob Dylan in this film, and
Mm.
every second he's on the screen, you believe in him as a person completely. You couldn't do a better job of playing Bob Dylan than, and I don't even like Timothy Chalamet in general as an actress.
Mm.
He's a bit Will o' the Wisp.
He's an absolute wonker. Yeah.
He's a bit
Topical gag there,
gentle,
but from the past. So
insubstantial,
Graham,
but he captures the
you,
complex character of Dylan in every single scene. And he's charming and he's charismatic. You watch that film, and I personally watched that. I felt like I was a teenager again. I wanted to be Bob Dylan, or
but
maybe Johnny Cash, who turns up
but
a
there's
few
a
times.
but,
He's also
Graham. There's a
very
but
cool.
because you said 45 minutes.
Mm.
Let's have the Graham
Well,
but.
well, the 45 minutes at the start is all about him arriving in New York, and it's perfect at capturing the
Mm.
politics, the milieu, the character, the feel, the tone of early 1960s New York and the folk music scene and the politics behind that folk music
Mm.
scene. It's just fantastic. And Edward Norton is great as Pete Seeger. It's
Mm.
in the two female characters, the Joan Baez character and the one that's based on Susie Rotolo, they're both very good as well.
Mm.
Great acting. You just love it. But then as he becomes successful and it's building up to him playing Newport Folk Festival and going
Yeah.
electric and playing like a Rolling Stone,
Yeah.
which is the exact opposite of what Pete Seeger and the folk scene that gave birth to Bob Dylan wanted.
Yes.
They wanted him to keep on doing acoustic music and
Yeah.
keep on being partially a folk singer and a
Mm.
protest singer, which Bob definitely didn't want to do because he was never really that person in the first place. Because
No.
his teenage roots were in rock and roll and the blues. They weren't in folk in the first place. So that has to happen because that's the truth. But in
Yeah.
moving to that story, they start to make it two dimensional. The story becomes two dimensional because they
Mm.
can't be bothered to put in the details that explain his transformation. So part of the reason that he turned into the rock and roller that he became was first of all the influence of the Beatles and British bands
Yeah.
who he actually met from '64 onwards
Yeah.
as people as well as liking the music. Secondly, he was into drugs and booze a lot,
Mm.
and most importantly, they don't mention the fact he hung out with the beat poets Allen Ginsberg, Berlinghetti, Malcolm
Mm.
McClure a lot,
Mm.
and his
Mm.
music changed because he basically became a beatnik, except with long hair,
Yeah.
under the influence of the Beatles, a rock and roll beatnik. And
Mm.
so his transformation into the new Bob Dylan becomes a bit two dimensional. It gets caught up in him being a rebel, and he's a non-conformist, but he's not really a rebel. But it's so well done and so well acted, and Timothy's so great as Bob Dylan, and it
Mm.
captures the excitement of being in the 1960s. It makes the 1960s look fantastic. So you can forgive it those faults, but it stops it being. If it carried on the way it was carrying on early on, it would have been an absolute five-star, amazing film.
Is is he unknowable, Dylan? Is he beyond comprehension?
No, No, I don't think so whatsoever. I
No.
think here's what he says. Like, if you listen to the dialogue where he's talking about himself, he's very
Mm.
honest about himself. I mean, although
Yeah.
he made up stories about his upbringing, his past when he arrived in New York,
Yeah.
partly to make himself more interesting, partly
Yeah.
because he didn't go on with his dad and was actually in flight from his upbringing. He's very middle class, very straight upbringing, which he completely rejected and
Mm.
didn't want to talk about it. Apart from that, he was always almost brutally honest, not just about other people, but also about himself. So I think Bob is what you get what you see with Bob Dylan. He
Mm,
may be weighing you up, he may be intelligent, he may be judgmental, he may be playful, and all that comes across in Timothy Chalamet's performance really well.
mm.
But when he says something, he never lies. What he's saying is what he believes. And what he believes does change from time to time. But then again, so did John Lennon's beliefs change from time to
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
So does everybody else. I don't think Bob is any more of as a person is any worse than any other person.
What about the influence of the director? And just remind me who the director is. He's made a previous biopic, of course. He made Walk the Line, I think, didn't
James Mangold.
he? Yeah.
It's
Now,
much better than Walk the Line. Even
right,
though Joaquin Phoenix is a great actor, this is a better music biopic than Walk the Line
because
because it captures the essence of why Bob Dylan was so big at
mm,
that time and what
mm.
was so exciting and important about the 1960s. It, it, if you don't know anything about the 1960s, watch A Complete Unknown and you'll understand.
We've had Todd Haynes's
And
film,
yeah,
of course,
yeah,
which
I'm not there.
yeah, I'm not there, which of course technically was because there was no Dylan there, or there were what nine different versions of Dylan who weren't Dylan, including Kate Blanchett and including I think a young child in it as well from memory from Africa, being a Dylan. We both saw
Mm-mm.
that film. Mark Kermode's preference was for that film over this film. He felt, as I say, he had his frustrations over certain technical inaccuracies.
Yeah,
There's also
that's just
the
Mark looking cool. It's
yeah.
much cooler to say I
There's
liked
also
I'm not there now.
and I'm gonna get this name wrong. Is it called Being Yeston Davis? Was it called Being Yeston Davis? The
Yeah,
Coen
it's
Brothers
close. It
one.
wasn't called that, but that's pretty close. Yeah, the Coen
Anyway,
Brothers
that
film.
so again, technically, it wasn't about Bob Dylan. It was about a failed
Mm,
folk singer, but there
mm,
was
mm,
but it was influenced by Dylan.
mm.
Where does this film? I mean, in terms of why make this film, and also because we'll be running out of time shortly, but why make the film? And secondly, who's it been made for?
I think it's been made for Bob Dylan fans
Right.
and for people who believe in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
But it's quite a youthful cast because most of the characters were young at the time, including
So
Joan Baez and
there'll
Bob
be a
Dylan himself.
Chalamet fan there'll be a Chalamet fan film club fan enthusiasts who would want to see it because Chalamet's in it.
Oh, he's cool as hell in it. He plays Dylan
Yeah.
so well. He makes Dylan look cool,
Mm.
which of course Dylan was.
So
Otherwise, he'd never been so
that will
big.
play to a younger audience as well as the audiences who are getting extremely old if they ever were at the Manchester Free Trade Hall.
Mm.
Um, in terms of why make this film, I mean, obviously, actually, one could leave the director to make that. But do you think it was worth making? Because I've mentioned, obviously, there's been, of course, there's PA, there's DA Pennebaker's "Don't Look Back," of course, which is seen perhaps as the definitive rock documentary ever made. Which,
Well, except for Martin Scorsese's No Direction Home, which goes on for about 5 hours, and
okay, I take your point.
that just covers them up to
It does.
66.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's part of the reason I wasn't looking forward to the film because that covers the same
Yes,
territory in great
yes.
detail with real
Mm,
people and real
mm,
interviews. So I
mm,
thought, how can they boil this down in a way that actually has the impact it needs to have in a
mm,
Hollywood setting? And
mm.
it does it perfectly. It's a Hollywood film. It's not an art house film,
No.
but it tells you, it lets you feel why Bob Dylan meant something. You feel it as you're watching it.
Mm,
So it achieves its objective. It's not a documentary. It's not strictly accurate the whole time, but it gets the feel completely right.
yeah. Well, I look forward to seeing it during this week. I'm hoping to see actually both that and Maria this week to be able to do a contrast between two new biopics. But I'm glad to hear, Graham, that actually for once you've enjoyed a biopic because more often than not, you don't.
Well, the rubbish in general.
Okay, okay. I actually enjoyed Walk the Line, but I take your point, and I enjoyed the Buddy Holly story. Uh, the two Elvis ones of recent times, I think there was some interest in both of those. I know what you're. I mean, I get what you're saying. I don't think they're pointless. Anthony's very kindly pointing out to us that it was called Inside Llewyn Davis.
That's true. That is right. Yeah.
So Yeston
Yeah.
Davis, to be fair, yes, Yeston, hello Yeston, of course, is a wonderful contralto singer. So hence the wrong title that I got.
Excellent. Slightly different style of music, Charles.
Inside Yeston Davis, a whole documentary on the wonderful contralto who lives in York.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic sub-production.